Hello, and welcome back to the sim. We're jumping back in with the ATR 600 again and looking at MIDI controllers. Using the XTouch Compact, we're going to assign some controls to our MIDI controller so that we can use them in Microsoft Flight Sim. Let's jump in and get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the XTouch Mini layout. I'm using the same layout that I did for the Kodiak build if you looked at that video previously. I'm doing this because, well, I have this template on top and it just makes my life easier to match things. Starting on the top though, we're just going to highlight that I've only assigned things to the top layer. I have a lot of control devices and I don't put anything on the secondary layer. Now when we look at it starting on the top left with the knobs, I've assigned heading to the top left knob, as you can see with heading. Now these knobs do have a push button, and so for each function we've applied some use of the push. With heading, this is going to sync our heading, as we'll see later when we show this to you. Course, the pushing is going to toggle between FMS and V/ILS1 mode, because you do manually have to change that if you want to fly in ILS. On the altitude select knob, I chose to use the toggle event to allow me to switch between changing by 1000s or changing by 100s. On the pitch knob, we've got it so that it'll do the pitch wheel and it will do our IAS speed mode when we're in IAS or flight level change mode, whichever way you want to call it. And pushing on that knob is going to toggle in and out of speed managed mode or manual entry, so the cyan versus magenta color. BARO is going to adjust the BARO, and pushing it will put it into standard mode. Range is going to control the MFD range, and pushing on it will toggle between your different layouts. COM is going to do COM. Pushing on it toggles between whole values or fractional values, and the COM knob is conditioned, so it's going to track whatever COM you're currently transmitting on. That's going to define which one it's controlling, so there are some conditions we'll cover. The NAV is going to control the NAV frequency. We could do the same thing. I got lazy and decided just to go with NAV1. I'm not going to use NAV2, and if I have to, all right, fine, I'll go into the UI to do it. On the slider, we're going to map that to our MIP controls. So this is the backlighting for the MIP in the overhead, making it easy to adjust the lighting for those with the slider. Didn't know what else to do with it. Now when we come down to the buttons, these are going to be all the modes as labeled. So heading mode, nav mode, altitude mode, VS mode, autopilot mode, yaw damper mode, COM swap. So again, it's going to track whether you're on COM 1 or COM 2 as your transmit, and that will swap between the active and the standby frequency. NAV will do the swap as well. Just keep in mind, NAV does need to be out of auto mode. We're going to cover that afterwards. And if you hold those two buttons down, they will actually change the MFD to bring up the associated menu for them so you can visually see what you're tuning on the MFD screens. Then the bottom row has level. Currently pushing it won't do anything, but level will light up when you're in pitch and roll hold modes. Approach mode, VNAV mode, flight level change or IAS climb descent modes, flight director, and then we've got COM 1 transmit, COM 2 transmit, and then we have the both button for doing the listens or the receives. That way it'll work with vPilot. Note, I've had a weird thing with the COM 1. Sometimes you just have to mash that button to get it to switch back to COM 1. Don't know what the ATR is doing, but it just does some weird things. Okay, now that we've got ourselves laid out around that, let's go ahead and jump into SPAD.next so we can see how we've done it. So here we are in SPAD.next on the panel's XTouch Mini tab. So that's my MIDI controller. And the first 8 or 7 are going to be those knob buttons. So the knob buttons will show up as buttons 0 through 7, so the first 8 buttons. And then the knob itself, so 10.1 and button 0 are associated as the same control. 10.1 is the change control command. It's in the 10 channel and it's the first value. So with 0, we are going to be using the LVAR, and we're going to be setting this LVAR to heading sync 1. And what that is doing is it's going to set the value, which is a button push, and that LVAR will automatically get reset back to 0, and this is doing the M-star select heading sync. We have done a video previously how to use the data monitor to find this stuff. I highly recommend you watch that video. It is only a few minutes long, 8 minutes long. It will walk you through how to use the data monitor to find all of these LVARs so you can control them and figure out all the buttons you want as well. So that will sync our heading. Perfect. On the knob itself, well, we are going to increment the M-star select heading. We increment that by 1, and we want to make sure to set our limits to 0 and 359 with our rollover. That way it'll wrap around. At the same time, for this to actually take an update, you have to also set the LVAR of selector heading changed to a 1. It will reset to a 0 automatically, so that's why we don't have to set it back ourselves manually. It's on its own little quick timer. And this one can be hard to see in the data monitor, so it's great to do and button mash it a lot until they come up. So there we go. That's going to be on our clockwise turn. And on our counterclockwise turn, we're going to decrement that by 1, and we are going to set to a -1. Sometimes you set by 1, sometimes you set by -1. It can be a little bit of trial and error until you figure it out. Now, when adding an event, you've got your tuner clockwise, counterclockwise. You can also copy, then paste the event, or Control-C, Control-V, and then what I had done was I simply I changed trigger type to counterclockwise, and then I had come in, selected this, set it to decrement, because that keeps all these values, and then I had changed this to a -1. I tried 1, it kind of worked, but didn't really work. Changed it to -1, because again, I loaded these up in the data monitor so I could see the values as I clicked on the wheel to see what it did, or knob, not wheel. All right, I don't need to keep those. Moving on to the next knob. So basically this is increment FGCP course by 1. And here, instead of change, it's delta. So delta by 1, and then we did the decrement and the -1. So very much similar. And then on the button 1, here we looked for the FGCP source selector, and we incremented it by 1, and I set it to a limits of 0, 1 with rollover. So this will act as a toggle. Now there are 4 positions on that switch, and if you want to be able to use ILS2 or FMS2, change this to a value of 3, and then you'll toggle through FMS1, ILS1, ILS2, FMS2, and then it'll roll over and switch back and start over again. I plan on not really ever using those, so I left it really quick and simple this way. So the third knob is going to be my local variable. So here, and we've shown this in the past, I'm building my own local variable. And so to do that, instead of selecting a variable, it was new local variable, and I created an alt knob variable. And I want to increment this by 1, limits of 0 and 1 with rollover. Again, this turns this into a toggle event. It will roll over back to 0 on the next click. Now using that value, when we come down to the third knob, you'll see that when the value is 0, we're going to increment the ACL data by 1s and decrement on the counterclockwise turn, decrement by 1, and use the -1 setting, so that this way it will increment and decrement the altitude by 100. I changed those values to 10s and then made the condition when it's set to a 1. So now I click on the knob, I can turn by 1,000. Click on the knob again, turn by 100s. Moving on to our fourth knob, and here on the button push of the pitch knob, we've gone ahead and set this to be a speed target select to 1. Now what this does is it pushes the button to toggle between managed magenta color or pushing it back to blue cyan, which allows you to manually control it. The knob itself though has a few different values. It's going to check if it's not in IAS speed mode, so is not equal to 1 for IAS speed mode, then it's going to control the pitch wheel. And by controlling the pitch wheel, that will be either pitch mode or VS mode, depending on what the autopilot's already doing. However, if we're in IAS mode, then it's going to instead control the knob for the speed target. Again, that value is not going to change unless it's in the cyan color. So if I switch over and we're in manage mode, make sure to press the knob, and then you'll be able to get back into manual speed mode and dial in your own speed. Coming over to the BARO knob, we are controlling the M-star BARO values. That way, same thing, delta by 1, increment by 1. Set delta to -1, decrement by 1, that's the turning of the knob. Pushing the knob is going to set the standard 1 button to 1. Coming along to our range knob, this will change my APHIS format on my left-hand side. It's going to go by 1s, and you'll see that with the increment it by 1, and it's automatically going to dial through the different formats. And then you have to set that delta to provide the change. This one resets. It's basically like almost like a button push. I didn't even need to put a rollover, and it worked just fine. So when we come over to the COM knob, you're going to see local COM knob 1. That is incrementing the knob value, so which one we're supposed to be using. This event is no longer needed. I shouldn't have had that there. So again, COM knob 1, I've got my own value for toggling between what we use that for. So on the COM, so what we're doing here is we are checking that local COM knob. When it's a 0 and COM transmit is 1, we're changing COM 1 radio whole and incrementing. On the counterclockwise turn, same checks, that'll be the decrement. Now on the clockwise turn, if we've clicked on the knob and it's a value of 1, we're going to do the fractional numbers. And then same thing, we'll decrement with fractional numbers. If COM 2 is the transmitting COM, we basically copied all 4 of these vents, pasted them, and we changed it from COM 1 transmitting to COM 2 transmitting. And now we changed the event from COM 1 to COM 2. So that way, whatever is our transmitting is going to be the one that we use. When we come over to the NAV knob, so NAV knob 0 and 1, same thing, click on the knob to toggle between fractional or whole values. You could set up some more things, some more conditions, or some more variables if you wanted, like maybe the long hold or press long on NAV. So coming back to this button, you could, if you wanted, add a long press and add a second variable, which would be NAV select. And then you could have a second variable that is toggling between with a long press, which NAV radio you're actively controlling. I don't plan to use NAV2. I'll do the ILS on NAV1. I don't really do much with those kinds of failures. So anyway, that's the knobs, pretty much straightforward. Then on our slider, the slider is linked to value 9. So here we used a scripted event, and the reason for this was I wanted to move the slider and just have the scripted event update on the device itself. So the first scripted event is looking at the device. So we went local, devices, XTouch, and we went to that MIDI control 9. So we selected control 9, and by the way, you can move it, click away, click back, and you'll see that value come up. So if I move it a little bit, click away, click back, you'll see the value has come up. I slide it back down to 0, click up, click back, it's back to 0. So I knew that was the one that I wanted. Now what I did was I said when it's in range of 0 to 20, so the value is 0 to 127 on the slider, and I need to do 6 things, 0 through 5. So I said, okay, well, 0 through 20. So that first little section will move the knob. Then we're going to set the M-star ILTS mid pedestal knob to 0 and the M-star ILTS overhead knob to 0. So that's the first setting. And what you'll see is we also made sure not to put any range or limits because the control is setting the value. And we set this to end processing. We then copied it, pasted it, edited the range to be 21 through 40, and then set those knobs to 1. And then we repeated, copy paste, change to 41 to 60, so the next range, set it to 2, 61 to 80, set it to 3, 81 to 100, and then 101 to 120. I could have made that 101 to 127, which is the top value that the knob makes. So MIDI knobs go 0 to 127 for their values. But that's the 6, 0 through 5 settings that the knobs have for backlighting. And so that we will see when we get into the backlighting. Now, jumping down to the first row of buttons on the controller. So looking at our heading, we are pressing the LVAR MS ATR FGCP heading to 1. So that button, all you have to do is set it to a 1 because it sets back automatically, and then that will trigger the heading button press because it's a toggle. Perfect. And we did it with a short mode. Now, the velocity node on C0, because this is C0, we tied this to having it go with the condition that heading is equal to 1 and that the SPAD uptime has changed. Now we're doing this because the hardware has its own value that by pressing the button it lights up, and then when you release the button it turns off. During that time frame, SPAD can have updated this light to say, hey, turn on the light. This way, every second it's going to run a change event, and if the light was off, it will make sure to set it back on. So this has been a workaround that's worked really well. Other people have put it in that they will put in a pause. So you could add an action, add a pause, and set that to like half a second. Make sure to put that first. And this is another way of doing it and then not having this uptime change event. So now it waits 500 milliseconds before sending that event, and hopefully you can set these times to a duration that it'll always catch and you haven't had your finger on the button for too long and it's sent first. For me, I use this method, and then that way it will always keep it in sync. Button 9, we're now pressing the NAV button. Same thing, we're using the stat nav. 10 is going to be altitude, 11 is going to be VS, 12 is going to be the AP, 13 is the yaw damper, and again, all these values use the stat values. 14 is going to be our COM1 radio swap, but again, here we're using two conditional events. It's checking if COM1 is currently transmitting. If it is, it tells COM1 to swap. If COM2 is the current transmit, then instead it would have sent COM2 to swap. And same thing, here we're going to set the MCP COM to 1. By adding this event when held for a longer time, this is going to bring it up on your menu. So this brings it up on your APHIS screen, your MFD screen, and that way you can use this to see the frequencies on that menu. 15, we did the same thing for radio, only I'm only using radio nav1, so I didn't put conditions. Same thing, if I hold that button for a long time, I can swap the screen on. 16, I've put no events on. This is the one that I marked as level button. There isn't really a level mode, but I left the standard condition on there from before, which was the wing leveler. It turns out whenever it's in pitch and roll, the ATR updates that standard VAR and wing leveler shows as on. Button 17, we've mapped to the approach mode, and I've set it to light up anytime that the stat for approach on the lateral is locked. So this is going to light up once it locks lateral, even before it has locked on the vertical as well. You pretty much have to have a lateral. You can't lock to the vertical and not to the lateral. So might as well lock to the lateral and bring the light on. For VNAV, we've set this to lock to stat 1. I still need to go through and verify this. Some other people have said they can't make VNAV work. This will take me some time, but I am off for a week, and I wanted to get this out before I headed out. 19, this is the flight level change or IAS speed mode. So that's going to set that by pushing the button. And again, same thing, it's going to track, are you in that mode? If so, light the button. Next up, we've got our flight director. So this is going to set our flight director to a 1, and it's going to track the state based on the flight director state. Coming over to 21, this is our pilot transmitter set event. So this will set the pilot to a static value of 0. If you don't enter it, it's the same thing. So that will say use COM 1. And again, I have had to button mash this thing a whole bunch of times to sometimes get it to take, so I see in vPilot that I am transmitting on COM 1. Button 22, this is to set COM 2 as the transmitter. And so pilot transmitter, value 1, switches. This works every time. The first time I press the button, it works every time. Button 23, we've got a lot of checks being done. And this is to figure out, am I transmitting on COM 1 and is receive all set to 1? This will toggle off receiving on both, so I only receive on 1. If it is off for receive all, it will set it to receiving on both 1 and 2. Then if COM 2 is transmitting and receive all is equal to 1, I need to set things for COM 1 to be different than COM 2, etc. Now this has worked out really, really well, and toggling this on and off depending what transmit I'm in seems to work in vPilot perfectly fine. So I can turn off listening to COM 2 or toggling COM 2's listen on and being able to hear it on vPilot. So moving across the top, we've got our heading controller. So as you can see, we can move that heading bug, and if we click on the button or the knob, it will sync the heading bug for us. So heading bug can move and click to sync. Coming over to our course knob, because we're in FMS knob or FMS mode, of course the course will not change. If we click on that knob, we are now changing the selector switch. So you can see up here, we can see the selector switch toggling between FMS and VOR1. And as we turn the knob, now our course changes. Coming over to the next knob is the altitude select knob. So as we scroll it, we can see we're changing by 100s. If we click on the knob, now we can move by thousands. So I want to climb to 2200 or 22,000. I can click on the knob and move much faster. Coming over to our pitch knob. So when we are in a mode, the pitch knob is going to control that mode. So first thing we need to do, obviously, is get the flight director on. And if we put ourselves into VS, then turn off VS, you'll see it goes into pitch hold. And now when we turn the knob, we can see our pitch bar is increasing. If we were in VS mode, now we can go ahead and we can dial up our VS that we want to climb at. And we see the VS bug is moving up. If we were instead in IAS mode, so IAS mode, now that knob, because we're in magenta, we need to press this button right here. So auto or speed select. And we've mapped that to the button so we can toggle in and out of that mode. And when it's blue, now you can manually adjust that value or toggle it again and go back into the magenta color. On our BARO knob, you can see we can adjust our BARO, and like I said, you can hit standard value. It will change to the standard value. And as I've mentioned, it seems for whatever reason, altimeter 0 and altimeter 1 variables go to the standard 29er 2, and for some reason altimeter 3 and altimeter 4 are going to 29er 3. And so that's why you'll see 100 feet when you're up in the flight levels, 100 or 200 feet. So a lot of times I'll push that because we're coming through standard. I'll move up by 1 click, move back down, and that'll get all 4 of those values in sync, and then we should hold the proper altitude. On your range knob, you can see the range on our MFD is changing, and if we click on it, it will cycle through our different modes. So there you go, nice and easy. Then we come over to our COM knob, and you can see we are changing the standby, toggle it. Now I'm doing the fractional. And then we've got the same thing for our NAV. But first we'll look at the COM swap. So the button right below, right, you can see that it swaps. And when we come over to the NAV, if I hold the NAV button, it will change that menu to show me the NAV frequencies. And if I hold the COM swap button, it will change to show me the COM frequencies. So that's really, really useful. And it's important when we come over to this NAV knob to talk about it that we need to press and hold that swap button. And the reason for it is this won't work. You'll see the values change when you turn the knob, but when you hit the swap button, it won't take. And it's because you have to click and uncheck the auto mode. Now that you've unchecked the auto mode, now when we swap it, the value will take. So real quick, looking down at the pedestal, these were the knobs that we've mapped to that slider using those script events. And so we can get our brightness controlled for our backlighting just the way we like. You can of course set up conditions and variables and add events so you could turn those knobs. You could put the A side for the MFD PED, the MIP, and you could put the B side for the overhead. I don't care, I like the lights to be the same amount, so I've linked them to be on the same value knob. All right, so coming down to the first row of buttons. So we've got our heading button. We press it, obviously the heading select goes on and it lights up. If I select NAV mode, it is going to arm. It will not light up the button until NAV mode becomes active. If you want to change this, the active modes do have a different value, and you could add additional conditions. You could even blink it for it armed, or you could just set it that if it does not equal 0, the light comes on. So even in an arm mode, it would still come on for you. Altitude hold, click on it, it will go into altitude hold mode, and it's an altitude intervene. It does not reset your altitude selector, which is really, really nice. And of course it lights up the button. Press it again and it'll drop out and go to the reset of pitch hold mode. If we wanted to climb with VS, I hit the VS button, I get VS, I get altitude select in blue or cyan as it is arming, waiting for it to intercept that. If we want the autopilot on, we hit the autopilot on button. Of course, because we're on the ground, it is not going to let us do that. Next up is the yaw damper. And again, same problem, you're not going to be able to get the yaw damper on because we are on the ground. We've got the COM swap button, so we've already seen that. Again, hold the button down, it will flip, and then we can toggle the COM. If we were to hit the swap button for the NAV, hold it down, switches, and again, because we're out of auto mode, it allows it to switch. And no, I could not find a variable for this, so that's held within the gauges. You have to click it. There's no way for us to map that to a button function. Boo, I know. Bottom row of the buttons, we've got our level button, which does nothing, but it will light up when we are in roll and pitch hold modes. The wing leveler come on. Then we've got our approach mode, and so you can see you'll go into loc and glide slope arm. It will not light up until at least the localizer is captured. VNAV. So you can go into VNAV, but obviously it's going to blink at us right now because it requires LNAV to be armed. And since we're not in LNAV mode, and it's not locked, we are going to see select LNAV. Then we've got our flight level change or IAS mode, so it will climb with IAS mode, and we can toggle off VNAV so it's not on. Then we've got our flight director, so flight director on and off. And then you've got the COM swapping of which one, COM 1 or COM 2. And then this is where I have to just button mash it sometimes because it just does not want to take sometimes. It's very strange. Then we got the COM 2 select, and we've got the both. So we can turn on, turn off. And that's a quick roundabout about what we've mapped and how that's being used. If you are looking to get a snippet, it's simple. You click on any button. you come over here to online snippets. You can uncheck only for this aircraft if you are using a livery that I don't have assigned to this, because I only have so many liveries. So don't forget, you can uncheck that. Click on complete device, because I've only published the complete device under XTouch Mini, and then come over here and look for the Microsoft Flight Sim ATR 600 XTouch Mini. It is 8387. You click on it, and then you can hit yes. This will replace all of your events and make it identical to what's online. You can hit no, and it will merge all these events. Then you can go through and delete things that you want to get rid of, but keep things you already had programmed. Or you can hit cancel, and it will not change it on you. Well, there you have it, guys. We're getting out of here. Please, if you made it this far, hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Come along on the next one. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.